During a house fire, my dad pushed me back into the flames and grabbed my brother's hand. Mom coldly said we cannot risk losing our son and left me to die in the fire. They had no idea I escaped. The ceiling beam collapsed in a shower of blinding sparks and thick black smoke. The intense heat blistered my skin as I reached out my small, trembling hand toward my father. I grabbed the sleeve of Desmond's expensive jacket, coughing violently and begging for help. Desmond turned and looked me dead in the eyes. His expression held no love and no mercy. He violently shoved me backward. I fell hard against the burning floorboards, gasping for air as the flames roared around me. He grabbed my older brother Andre by the collar and dragged him toward the only safe exit in the hallway. My mother Yolanda stood safely by the doorway, watching the fire lick the walls around my legs. "Leave her, Desmond," she yelled, her voice cutting clearly over the roaring inferno. "We cannot risk losing our son. Get Andre out of here right now." They turned their backs and ran. They did not hesitate. They did not look back. They left me burning alive on the bedroom floor to save their precious golden boy. 15 years later, the air conditioning inside the Atlanta Heritage Gala felt like ice against my skin, but my blood was boiling with anticipation. I adjusted the neckline of my custom crimson gown, ensuring the heavy silk draped perfectly to reveal just a hint of my collarbone. The grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel glittered with massive crystal chandeliers and the most elite African-American families in the state. At the center of the room stood the main stage, displaying a massive gold banner that read, "Congratulations to the Vanguard family of the year, Desmond and Yolanda." I walked confidently past the velvet ropes, ignoring the seating host, who tried to check my invitation, and sat directly at their reserved VIP table, right in the center seat. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the crystal pitcher and waited. It took exactly 3 minutes for my brother's wife to notice me. Brittany marched over her pale skin, flushed with absolute indignation. Brittany wore a gaudy designer dress that cost more than Andre actually earned in a year at the family firm. She stopped at the edge of the table and crossed her arms, staring down at me with profound disgust. "Excuse me, you are in the wrong section," she said loudly, making sure the surrounding tables could hear her sharp tone. "This table is reserved exclusively for the honorees and their immediate family." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I set the glass down, smoothed my napkin on my lap, and finally looked up at her. "The seat was empty," I replied calmly, matching her gaze with unwavering intensity. Brittany scoffed and flagged down a passing waiter. She snapped her manicured fingers right in his face, treating him like a common servant. "You need to call security right now," she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "This woman is trespassing in the VIP section. My husband is about to be named future CEO of the year, and his parents are receiving the highest honor of the night. We cannot have some random charity case ruining our high society aesthetic for the photographers. I want her removed." The waiter looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from side to side as he glanced between us. "Ma, am sure there is just a misunderstanding regarding the seating chart," he mumbled, trying to de-escalate the situation. Brittany stepped closer to me, her voice dripping with the kind of arrogant white privilege she wielded like a weapon in these elite spaces. "There is absolutely no misunderstanding," she sneered, leaning over the table. "You people always try to sneak into spaces where you do not belong. Look at you trying to blend in with old money in that dress. Andre and I paid $50,000 for this table sponsorship out of our own pockets. I am not having my perfect evening ruined by someone looking for a free meal or a photo opportunity. Get up and leave before I have you arrested for trespassing." Several guests nearby stopped their conversations and turned to watch the commotion. I knew exactly what Brittany was doing. She loved using her status as the white wife of a wealthy black family to exercise power over black women she deemed beneath her station. She expected me to shrink down, to apologize profusely, or to cause an emotional scene that would validate her prejudice and give her a reason to play the ultimate victim. I did none of those things. I remained seated with perfect posture, unbothered by her performance. I picked up a heavy silver dinner fork and tapped it gently against my crystal water glass. The sharp ringing sound cut through the rising tension in the room, drawing even more attention to our table. "Are you deaf?" Brittany yelled, losing her polite society facade entirely. I said get up right now before I call the police. I finally stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my crimson gown and looked her directly in the eye, making sure she felt the crushing weight of my stare. "I am perfectly aware of how much this table costs, Brittany," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent space. "I also know that Andre did not pay for it because Andre currently owes $5 million to private creditors and his bank accounts have been overdrawn since last Tuesday." Brittany turned an ugly shade of red, her mouth dropping open. "How dare you make up lies about my husband?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Security! I need security right now! Help me!" The gala director, a tall man in a tailored tuxedo, rushed over looking absolutely panicked. "Mrs. Brittany, please calm down," he pleaded, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes, there is a huge problem," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Remove this woman immediately. She is harassing my family and making threats about our finances." I ignored Brittany completely. I turned to the gala director and opened my clutch. I pulled out a sleek, solid titanium black card and handed it directly to him. The director looked at the card, and his eyes widened in absolute shock. "Check the name on that account," I told him smoothly, keeping my tone professional but lethal. "You will find that as of 3 hours ago, my private equity firm bought out the parent organization that runs this entire charity foundation. I am not a guest at this table. I am the primary title sponsor of the entire evening." The director swallowed hard, clutching the titanium card like a lifeline. "Yes, ma." He stammered, bowing his head slightly in deep respect. "I was informed of the acquisition this afternoon, but I did not realize you were attending personally. We are incredibly grateful for your historic donation to the fund." Brittany stared at the director, her face contorting in pure disbelief. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, grabbing the director's arm. "You are taking her side against me. She is an imposter. You need to call the police and have her thrown out." The director shook his head nervously, stepping away from her grasp. "I am sorry, Mrs. Brittany, but this woman literally owns the event tonight. I cannot ask her to leave." I looked back at Brittany and smiled a cold, calculated smile. "You should close your mouth before you catch a fly," I suggested, watching her entire reality crumble. "Now run along and find your broke husband. I have a very important announcement to make." I turned back to the director, holding out my hand. "I need a working microphone right now." He practically tripped over his own feet, rushing to the main podium to grab a wireless microphone for me. I took it and tapped the mic twice, testing the sound. The loud feedback echoed through the massive ballroom, instantly silencing the remaining chatter. Every single person turned their attention to me, standing powerfully at the Vanguard 5 YP table. "Good evening, Atlanta," I said, projecting my voice with absolute authority. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate legacy wealth and family values. We are here to honor a family that supposedly represents the pinnacle of success and moral integrity in our community." For years, the Vanguard Investment Group has positioned itself as the gold standard of financial excellence. You have trusted them with your portfolios, your retirement funds, and your children's futures. But while you were applauding their success, they were drowning in toxic debt. They leveraged your investments to cover up catastrophic losses in offshore accounts. They mortgaged their own headquarters 3 times over just to maintain the illusion of wealth. The crowd began to whisper urgently, cell phones lighting up as people immediately started texting their brokers. Brittany stood frozen, her face a mask of mounting panic as she realized the implications of my words. As the new majority shareholder of their debt, I announced I ordered a full forensic audit. And what I found was not just gross negligence, it was systematic fraud. I paused, letting the heavy anticipation build in the room. I saw movement at the grand entrance of the ballroom. My father Desmond and my mother Yolanda were walking in, flanked by local photographers and reporters. They were smiling brightly, waving to the crowd until they stopped dead in their tracks when they saw a stranger standing at their table holding a microphone. But what happens when that legacy is built entirely on ashes? I asked into the mic, my voice ringing out clear and sharp. What happens when the wealth you flaunt was purchased with the blood of your own child? The wealthy crowd murmured in confusion and shock, turning to look at Desmond and Yolanda. Desmond pushed past the photographers, his face twisting with explosive rage. He marched aggressively toward the table, his expensive tuxedo looking suddenly tight across his chest as he breathed heavily. "Who the hell gave you a microphone?" he demanded loudly, striding across the carpet with his fists clenched, ready for a fight. "Get away from my family table before I throw you out onto the street myself." I lowered the microphone but did not turn it off. I turned to face him, fully stepping directly under the bright crystal chandeliers. The harsh light caught the deep, brutal burn scar that jagged across my collarbone and disappeared beneath the fabric of my custom gown. I let him look at it. I watched his eyes track the thick scar upward to my neck and then to my face. I watched the arrogant anger in his eyes dissolve into absolute, paralyzing terror. Desmond stumbled backward, knocking hard into a dining chair. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly. His hands began to shake uncontrollably as he stared at my eyes and then back down at the burn scar. "Lydia," he whispered, his voice cracking with profound disbelief and horror. "You are dead. The house burned down. You died in the fire." I raised the microphone back to my lips, ensuring every single person in that elite ballroom heard my response. I smiled coldly at the man who gave me life, and then tried to take it away for the sake of his golden son. "I crawled out of those ashes to collect my life insurance payout," I said, my voice echoing off the walls with chilling precision. "And I am here to collect it with interest. You have nowhere left to hide, Desmond. Your entire empire belongs to me now." The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute and heavy. The air conditioning blew cold against my skin, but my blood ran hot with the memory of the flames. Desmond stood completely paralyzed. His expensive tuxedo suddenly looked like a straitjacket. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking hollow and old. His eyes were locked on the thick, jagged burn scar that crawled up my collarbone. He recognized the mark of his own betrayal. He recognized the daughter he pushed into the inferno. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was completely broken by the impossible reality standing before him. But Andre reacted exactly as I anticipated. My older brother, the golden child who was always handed the world on a silver platter, could not handle the shift in power. He could not process that the sister he thought was reduced to ash was now commanding the room. Andre shoved his chair backward with a sudden, violent burst of energy. The heavy wooden chair tipped over and crashed into a neighboring table. Crystal champagne flutes shattered against the polished marble floor. The sharp sound of breaking glass made several wealthy guests gasp and step away. Andre lunged forward, his face contorted into an ugly mask of pure rage. He raised a shaking hand and pointed a finger directly at my face. "You are a liar," he spat out, his voice cracking as he tried to project authority. "You are an imposter. My sister died in that fire 15 years ago. I saw the house burn to the ground. You are just some pathetic con artist trying to extort our family." He took another heavy step toward me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. He puffed out his chest, breathing heavily as he stared down at me. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the golden boy, the son who was deemed worth saving over my own life, and I felt nothing but profound pity. He was weak. He was always weak. I let the silence stretch, letting his desperate, aggressive blustering hang in the air. The crowd of elite investors and high society guests watched in stunned fascination. Cameras flashed rapidly from the media pit, capturing every second of the confrontation. The Vanguard family, the supposed pinnacle of African-American excellence in Atlanta, was unraveling in real time. Yolanda assessed the situation with the lethal speed of a seasoned predator. My mother saw the cameras flashing. She saw the whispers spreading like a virus among the wealthy socialites. She knew Andre's aggressive, violent display was making them look unhinged and guilty. She needed to protect the family brand. She needed to control the narrative immediately. So Yolanda pivoted. She switched tactics, instantly slipping into the role she played better than anyone else. She became the tragic, loving mother. "Oh my God!" Yolanda gasped, bringing both hands to her mouth in a perfectly choreographed display of shock. Tears welled in her eyes, perfectly timed and perfectly executed. She pushed past her furious son, her face breaking into a mask of overwhelming emotional joy. "It is a miracle," she cried out, her voice carrying the exact trembling pitch of a grieving mother whose prayers had finally been answered. "My baby. My sweet baby girl is alive." She reached out her arms wide, rushing toward me. She wanted to pull me into a tight embrace in front of the flashing cameras. She wanted the photographers to capture a touching family reunion. She wanted to trap me in her maternal grip, drag me away from the microphone and silence my truth. I smelled her expensive floral perfume as she closed the distance. The scent immediately brought back the smell of thick black smoke and burning wood. I stepped out of her grasp before her manicured hands could even brush the fabric of my crimson gown. I took one smooth, calculated step to the side, leaving her grasping at empty air. "Do not touch me, Yolanda," I said softly. The microphone caught every single syllable, broadcasting my cold rejection to the entire room. Yolanda stumbled forward, her arms falling uselessly to her sides. Her tearful smile froze into a tight, panicked grimace. "You left me burning on the floor," I reminded her, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You do not get to claim me now. You lost that right 15 years ago when you chose your son." I turned my attentions away from her fake tears and focused entirely back on Andre. The physical bravado he displayed just moments ago was beginning to crack. He was sweating now. A thin sheen of perspiration gathered on his forehead, reflecting the bright chandelier light. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a thick, folded stack of legal documents. The heavy white paper felt solid and reassuring in my hands. "I did not come here tonight to crash your party," I said, locking eyes with my brother. "I did not come here to say hello. I came here to do business." I tossed the stack of documents onto the table, right on top of their pristine white tablecloth. The papers fanned out, revealing signatures, bank logos, and the unmistakable black ink of legally binding contracts. "Let us talk about the Vanguard Investment Group," I announced, projecting my voice so every single investor and board member in the room could hear the absolute truth. "Let us talk about the future CEO of the year." Andre swallowed hard, staring down at the papers as if they were a live, explosive device. He took a slow step back, his hands dropping to his sides. "You see, Andre has a gambling problem." I continued my words, striking him like physical blows. "A very expensive, very dangerous gambling problem. But he could not use his own money to cover his mounting losses because he does not actually have any. He is just a figurehead playing businessman while his father holds the purse strings." So Andre did what any desperate, incompetent heir would do. He used the family company as collateral. I watched Desmond's head snap toward his son. The patriarch's eyes widened in sheer horror as the reality of my words finally sank in. Desmond did not know. The great and powerful businessman had absolutely no idea his empire had been secretly mortgaged from right under his nose. "That is a lie," Andre shouted, but his voice was thin, reedy, and completely stripped of its former power. "She is lying, Dad. Do not listen to her. She fabricated those papers." I stepped closer to the table, tapping a manicured nail against the top document. $5 million, I stated clearly, emphasizing the massive, devastating number. $5 million in high-interest toxic loans secured directly against the Vanguard commercial real estate portfolio. He borrowed it from a shadow syndicate because no legitimate bank in the city would lend him another dime. He forged your signature, Desmond. He leveraged everything you spent your entire life building just to pay off a few bad bets at the tables. Desmond looked at the legal papers and then looked at his golden child, the boy he saved from the fire, the boy who was supposed to carry on his perfect legacy. Andre was shaking violently now, shaking his head and stepping away from his father's furious gaze. "Dad, I can explain, Andre pleaded, holding his hands up defensively. It was a temporary setback. The market shifted unexpectedly. I was going to put the money back before you ever noticed. I swear I was going to fix it. Desmond looked like he was going to collapse. The facade of generational wealth he prized above his own daughter's life was crumbling into dust in front of the entire city. And what happens when a shadow syndicate wants their money back? I asked, drawing the room's attention back to me. They do not send polite letters in the mail. They do not invite you to charity galas. They send enforcers. They seize assets. They destroy legacies. But luckily for you, I stepped in. I paused, letting the heavy weight of my next words settle over the ruined family. My private equity firm bought the debt. I declared, my voice ringing with finality. We tracked down the syndicate. We bought every single loan Andre took out. We paid them off in cash. Which means your son no longer owes them $5 million. He owes me. And because he is in severe default because he has missed 3 consecutive payments, I have legally exercised the acceleration clause. I own the debt, I repeated, making sure the words echoed in Desmond's ears. Therefore, I own the assets. I own your corporate headquarters. I own your commercial properties. I own your investment portfolios. I own everything. The silence in the ballroom was absolute and suffocating. The elite crowd stood paralyzed, witnessing the complete financial annihilation of the Vanguard family. I owned them. I held their entire carefully constructed legacy in the palm of my hand, and I was closing my fist tight. At the edge of the VIP table, Brittany stood completely marginalized and ignored. The white sister-in-law who had boldly tried to have me thrown out by security was now realizing that the vast fortune she married into was gone. She was losing her elevated status, her unearned wealth, and her power. She absolutely hated being ignored. She hated that I, an African-American woman she deemed inferior, was commanding the room and systematically destroying her perfect affluent life. Her face twisted with a vicious, desperate realization. If she could not intimidate me with status, she would punish me with the law. She reached into her sequined evening purse and pulled out her smartphone. She did not hesitate for a single second. She dialed 911. As the emergency dispatcher answered the call, Brittany's entire demeanor changed in an instant. She weaponized her privilege with terrifying practiced speed. The arrogant, aggressive sneer vanished from her face, replaced entirely by manufactured terror. She hunched her shoulders, backing away from me and holding the phone close to her trembling mouth. "Help me!" she sobbed into the receiver, turning on the fake white tears effortlessly. Her voice shook thick with artificial panic and breathless fear. "Please, you have to send someone right now. We are at the Heritage Gala downtown. There is an aggressive black woman here. She is threatening my family. She has men waiting outside. She is demanding money and she said she is going to hurt us. Please hurry. I am so scared for my life." She hung up the phone and looked directly at me, her tears vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. She smiled a vicious, triumphant smirk, thinking she had won, thinking her weaponized tears would erase my power and put me in my place. The sound of the sirens bleeding through the thick walls of the ballroom caused a new wave of panic to ripple through the wealthy attendees. People began pulling out their phones, murmuring anxiously as they realized this was no longer just a high society scandal, but an active police situation. Brittany stood taller, her posture radiating a sick sense of satisfaction. She believed she had just dealt the winning hand. She believed the police would storm in, put me in handcuffs, and restore the natural order of her privileged world. I looked at Brittany, and then down at the table where the legal documents rested. The undeniable proof of their ruin. Desmond was clutching the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow and rapid. He was a man who had sacrificed his own flesh and blood to build an empire, only to watch it be dismantled by the very child he discarded. Andre was weeping softly, a pathetic display from a man who had played king for far too long. He realized that no amount of his father's influence could save him from the financial and legal trap he had built for himself. Yolanda stood frozen, her dramatic performance completely derailed by the incoming police presence. She looked back and forth between the doors and me, her mind calculating the damage control required to survive the night. But there was no spin that could save them from the truth printed in black and white on the table. The Vanguard family had built their entire identity on a foundation of lies, theft, and betrayal. The fire that had burned my skin 15 years ago was nothing compared to the inferno I had just ignited under their lives. The wailing sirens grew deafeningly loud, signaling the arrival of the authorities. Blue and red lights flashed violently through the glass entrance doors of the hotel, casting eerie, shifting shadows across the ballroom walls. The gala director backed away nervously, signaling his staff to clear a path for the police. Brittany crossed her arms, waiting for my downfall, waiting for the system to protect her at my expense. I simply reached into my clutch once more, feeling the cold, smooth metal of the building's deed against my fingertips. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my heart rate. Let them come, I was ready. The heavy double doors of the grand ballroom did not just open, they burst apart. The heavy brass handles slammed against the wall as 4 Atlanta police officers stormed into the room. Their hands rested instinctively on their heavy tactical belts, and the loud static of their shoulder radios cut right through the soft classical music playing from the string quartet in the corner. The entire room went dead silent. The wealthy elite of Atlanta, the politicians, the real estate moguls, the plastic surgeons, they all froze watching the authorities march directly toward our VIP table. Brittany did not miss a single beat. The moment the officers were within earshot, she collapsed against Andre, burying her face against the lapel of his expensive tuxedo. She began to sob hysterically, her shoulders heaving with perfectly choreographed terror. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "That is her!" Brittany cried out, her voice pitched to the exact frequency of a terrified, helpless victim. "She is the one. She threatened to kill us. She said she has a weapon in her bag, and she is going to destroy our entire family. Please, you have to get her away from us." It was a sickeningly flawless performance. I had seen her do this before years ago when I was just a teenager observing her from the shadows of my father's house. She used this exact same weaponized fragility to get a black valet fired at the country club because he parked her car too far away. She used these same artificial tears to intimidate anyone who dared to question her absolute entitlement. Now she was using them to summon the full force of the law against me, hoping to see me slammed face first into the marble floor and dragged out in handcuffs. She wanted to turn me into a violent stereotype to protect her husband's $5 million secret. The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern jawline, immediately stepped between me and the table. He raised his hand flat and commanding, ordering me to step back and keep my hands visible. "Ma'am, do not reach into that clutch," he ordered, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "We received a panic call about an armed individual making terroristic threats. I need your identification right now." I did not move my hands. I kept them perfectly still, resting lightly against the silk of my crimson gown. I did not raise my voice or react to the aggressive command. Instead, I shifted my gaze to my parents. I looked directly at Desmond and Yolanda. They were standing mere feet away, watching the police advance on their own flesh and blood. Desmond, the great patriarch who prided himself on family loyalty, stood completely mute. His jaw was clenched, but he refused to meet my eyes. He could have intervened. He could have told the officers that I was his daughter, that this was a civil financial dispute over corporate debt and not a violent crime. But he chose silence. Yolanda was even worse. My mother actually took a small, fearful step backward, clutching her diamond necklace and arranging her face into an expression of frightened innocence. They were entirely willing to let me be arrested. They were willing to let me take the fall to suffer the humiliation of being searched and handcuffed in front of the entire city, just so their precious reputation could remain intact. They wanted me to disappear into the back of a squad car, so they could go back to sipping vintage champagne and accepting their fraudulent Family of the Year award. Andre wrapped his arms protectively around Brittany, glaring at me with a toxic mix of fear and triumph. He genuinely believed that his white wife's tears were a magic spell that would simply erase the crushing debt I held over his head. She is insane! Brittany wailed louder, peeking out from Andre's chest. She is just some jealous, crazy woman trying to extort my husband. Please search her bag. Get her away from my children. Her children were not even at the gala. They were safely at home with a private nanny, but the police did not know that. The officers exchanged a tense glance, preparing to physically detain me. The lead officer took a step closer, unhooking the strap on his belt. Ma, and I will not ask you again, he warned. I kept my posture absolutely straight. I did not give Brittany the angry, out-of-control reaction she was desperately trying to provoke. I refused to play the role she had written for me. Instead, I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers twice. The sharp sound cut through Brittany's fake sobbing. From the shadows near the entrance of the ballroom, my lead attorney, Marcus Vance, stepped into the light. Marcus was a former federal prosecutor, a man whose reputation in Atlanta's legal circles was legendary. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He walked with a slow, deliberate confidence, parting the sea of shocked gala guests, until he stepped smoothly between me and the advancing police officers. Officers! Marcus set his voice a deep, authoritative rumble that instantly commanded respect. There is absolutely no need for escalation. My client, Ms. Lydia Vanguard, is not trespassing, and she is certainly not armed. The lead officer paused, his hand hovering over his belt. He looked at Marcus, recognizing the expensive suit and the undeniable aura of high-powered legal authority. Brittany stopped crying for a fraction of a second, her head snapping up. "That is a lie," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "She is a criminal! She is extorting us! Arrest her!" Marcus did not even dignify Brittany with a glance. He opened his briefcase with a quiet click and extracted a thick, notarized stack of property deeds carrying the heavy embossed seal of the state of Georgia. He handed the documents directly to the lead officer. As of closing today at 4 in the afternoon, Marcus stated clearly, Vanguard Private Equity successfully purchased the entire holding company that owns this hotel and this ballroom. Ms. Vanguard is not an intruder. She is the landlord of this building. The people who are currently trespassing are the ones sitting at that table. The lead officer clicked on his tactical flashlight and shined it directly onto the documents. He read the official seal, the signatures, and the bold print declaring me the sole owner of the property. The tension in the officer's shoulders dropped immediately. He let out a long breath, looking from the legal deed to my face, and then over to Brittany, who was now hyperventilating for real. "There is no weapon," Marcus continued, his voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room. "This is a corporate acquisition that the former owners are apparently very unhappy about. However, since the police are already here, we have some additional paperwork that requires immediate serving." Marcus reached into his briefcase one more time and pulled out a large, thick manila envelope. He turned slowly toward Desmond, who was gripping the edge of the VIP table so hard his knuckles were turning purple. Desmond looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. "Desmond Vanguard," Marcus announced loudly, ensuring that every single investor, politician, and socialite in the room heard every word. "You are hereby legally served with a 30-day notice of eviction for the Vanguard family business headquarters, located on Peachtree Street. The building was leveraged as collateral against your son's defaulted loans, which my client now owns in full. You have exactly 1 month to clear out your desks and vacate the premises." Marcus dropped the heavy envelope onto the table. It landed with a loud smack right next to Yolanda's half-empty champagne flute. The ballroom erupted into frantic, chaotic whispers. The entire social hierarchy of Atlanta was flipping upside down right before their eyes. The police officers looked completely disgusted, realizing they had been used as pawns in a billionaire's corporate takeover. The lead officer turned to Brittany, his expression hardening into pure professional anger. "Ma," he said, his voice sharp and unyielding. "You called emergency services claiming there was an armed intruder making death threats. Filing a false police report to settle a financial dispute is a serious felony in this state." Brittany's face drained of all color, leaving her looking pale and sickly. The fake tears completely vanished, replaced by genuine, absolute panic. She stammered, taking a step back away from the officers. She looked frantically at Andre for help to defend her, to throw his weight around. But Andre was staring at the eviction notice on the table like it was a ghost. He was completely paralyzed. If you ever misuse the emergency dispatch system again to harass the owner of a building, the officer warned Brittany, leaning in close, I will personally see that you leave this venue in handcuffs. Do you understand me? Brittany could only nod, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The officers turned around, shaking their heads in disgust, and marched out of the ballroom, leaving the heavy oak doors wide open behind them. Brittany was left standing in the center of the VIP section, publicly humiliated, stripped of her perceived power, and exposed as a manipulative liar in front of the most elite families in the city. The society wives who used to fear her sharp tongue and beg for her invitations were now openly laughing behind their hands and pointing at her ruined mascara. Her weaponized privilege had just been permanently revoked. Desmond watched the police walk away, and reality finally crashed down upon him. He saw his empire crumbling to dust. He saw his headquarters lost, his son's massive fraudulent debt exposed, and his reputation completely obliterated. He knew the investors in the room were already making calls to pull their money from his firm. He was bleeding out financially, and I was the one holding the knife. Panic completely overtook his pride. Desmond stepped around the table, rushing toward me with his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. He tried to switch back to the role of a loving father, desperately attempting to salvage whatever was left of his fractured legacy. Lydia, sweetheart. Desmond whispered, his voice shaking as he reached out as if to touch my arm. Let us handle this in-house. Please, we are family. You have made your point. You have proven how smart you are. Come home. We can give you your old bedroom back. We can put this all behind us and be a family again. I looked at the man standing in front of me. I looked at the father who had looked me in the eye while the ceiling collapsed and actively shoved me backward into a wall of roaring fire. I looked at his pleading, desperate eyes, begging me for mercy to save his own skin. And I laughed. It was a genuine, cold, bitter laugh that echoed through the quiet ballroom, freezing the blood in his veins. My old bedroom, I asked, my voice dripping with pure lethal venom. You mean the room you demolished the day after my empty casket funeral, just so you could expand Andre's walk and closet? I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, forcing him to back away. Keep it. I leaned in close, making sure he heard my final sentence perfectly over the whispers of his ruined peers. You have 48 hours to vacate your mansion, Desmond. I bought that too. The morning sun poured through the expansive glass windows of the Oakwood Estates Country Club, but the atmosphere inside the private executive boardroom was suffocatingly tense. The mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by the most powerful and affluent African-American business leaders in Atlanta. These were men and women who controlled the political and financial landscape of the city. They were surgeons, federal judges, real estate tycoons, and generational wealth inheritors. Sitting at the very head of the table were Desmond and Yolanda Vanguard. They had called this emergency meeting less than 12 hours after the disastrous events at the charity gala. They were desperate to control the narrative before the whispers of their financial ruin could fully spread through the elite community. Yolanda wore a pristine white tailored suit, projecting the image of a flawless, innocent matriarch who was currently under siege. She dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a silk handkerchief, perfectly maintaining her composure while shedding exactly the right amount of tears to garner deep sympathy. We are facing an unprecedented and vicious attack on our family legacy, Yolanda said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. She looked around the long table, making direct eye contact with every single board member. The woman who invaded the gala last night is a dangerous criminal. She is a highly sophisticated con artist who has somehow managed to steal the identity of our deceased daughter, Lydia. As you all know, we lost our sweet girl in a tragic fire 15 years ago. The pain of that loss has never left us. And now this opportunistic parasite has exploited our deepest family trauma to fabricate fraudulent corporate debt. She is attempting to extort us, and she is using stolen funds to launch a hostile takeover of the Vanguard Investment Group. We need this community to stand with us. We need you to freeze this woman out of every bank, every private club, and every charitable organization in this state. Desmond leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. He nodded solemnly, backing up his wife's elaborate web of lies. We have always protected our own in this community, Desmond said, his voice deep and gravelly. We represent the absolute pinnacle of Black excellence in this city. We have built a legacy that paves the way for the next generation. This imposter wants to tear down everything we have built. She used fabricated documents to threaten us at the gala. She claims she bought our debt, but I assure you my company is completely solvent. We are simply dealing with a highly coordinated cyber attack. If we allow this criminal to infiltrate our social and business circles, she will not stop with my family. She will come after all of you next. We must leverage our collective power to blacklist her entirely. Sitting next to Desmond was his golden child, Andre. Andre did not look like the confident heir to a massive financial empire. He looked physically ill. His designer suit was slightly wrinkled, and a thick layer of sweat coated his forehead. He kept bouncing his knee under the table, his eyes darting nervously toward the heavy boardroom doors. He was drinking glass after glass of ice water, trying to cure a severe hangover masking a massive panic attack. But the board members did not notice his trembling hands. They were completely captivated by Yolanda's emotional manipulation. Judge Marcus, a senior board member who had known the Vanguard family for 20 years, slammed his hand flat against the table in a show of absolute solidarity. "This is an outrage," Marcus declared, his voice booming through the room. "Desmond, you and Yolanda have done nothing but uplift this community. You funded the new wing of the hospital. You sponsored the youth academies. To have some nameless fraud try to steal your dead daughter's identity to rob you is sickening. You have my word, Desmond. I will make sure this woman cannot open a checking account in the state of Georgia without setting off alarms. We will crush her before she can file a single piece of paperwork." The other board members murmured their fierce agreement, nodding along and pledging their vast resources to protect the Vanguard family name. Yolanda offered a weak, grateful smile, playing the role of the relieved victim to absolute perfection. That is when the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom swung open. I did not knock. I did not ask for permission to enter. I simply walked into the room wearing a sharply tailored charcoal business suit, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. 2 country club security guards hurried in behind me, looking panicked and apologetic. "I am sorry, Judge Marcus," one of the guards stammered, looking terrified. "We tried to stop her at the front gate, but she bypassed the security checkpoint. She had the access override codes." "You can leave us now," I told the guards without even turning around to look at them. "I own the private security firm that holds the contract for this entire country club. You work for me. Close the doors on your way out." The guards hesitated for a fraction of a second before quickly backing out of the room and pulling the heavy doors shut. The click of the brass latch locking into place echoed loudly in the sudden deathly silence of the boardroom. Every single head turned to stare at me. Yolanda shot up from her leather chair, her face contorting with immediate visceral rage. Her pristine white suit suddenly seemed at odds with the ugly, hateful snarl twisting her features. "How dare you show your face here?" Yolanda screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Security! I want her arrested right now. She is trespassing." Marcus called the police chief immediately. I ignored my mother entirely. I did not look at Desmond, who was gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. I walked directly to the empty space at the opposite end of the long mahogany table. I placed my sleek leather briefcase on the polished surface and popped the metal latches open. The sound was sharp and deliberate. "You can call me a fraud all you want, Yolanda," I said, my voice perfectly calm and measured. "You can cry your fake tears and spin your pathetic lies about cyber attacks and stolen identities. But there is one thing in this world that does not care about your tears. There is one thing that does not care about your precious high society reputation. And that is the math. Numbers do not lie. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 4 thick, heavy leather-bound audit ledgers. I tossed them down the center of the table. They slid across the smooth wood, stopping right in front of Judge Marcus and the other senior board members. I did not come here today to defend my character, I announced, locking eyes with Marcus. I came here to protect your wallets. I highly suggest you open those files, Judge Marcus, because while Desmond and Yolanda have been sitting here begging for your protection, they have been actively robbing you blind. The room erupted into furious protests. Desmond jumped to his feet, his face flushed with panic. Do not look at those files, Desmond shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. They are forged. She is trying to manipulate you. Marcus, throw her out right now. But Marcus did not throw me out. His legal instincts kicked in. He reached forward and opened the first heavy ledger. The other board members leaned in close, their eyes scanning the detailed spreadsheets, highlighted bank statements, and internal accounting logs. The room grew unnervingly quiet as they read the numbers. Let me save you the trouble of reading the fine print, I offered, pacing slowly behind my chair. 3 years ago, this board appointed Andre Vanguard as the primary treasurer for the Country Club Expansion Committee. You trusted him because he was Desmond's son. You gave him unrestricted access to the club pension fund and the multi-million-dollar renovation budget. It was supposed to be a simple job for the golden boy. But Andre is not a businessman. He is an addict. Andre let out a strangled, gasping sound. He slumped down in his chair, burying his face in his hands. If you look at page 42, I instructed smoothly, you will see exactly how he did it. He set up 6 dummy corporations, listed as construction vendors and landscaping contractors. Over the course of 36 months, Andre authorized 114 wire transfers from the Country Club Pension Fund directly into those shell companies. He stole $200,000 here, $500,000 there. He bled your retirement accounts dry to cover his own massive gambling debts. He stole a total of $4.2 million from this very room. That is impossible, Marcus whispered, his face turning a dangerous shade of red as he stared at the undeniable proof. The bank routing numbers, the authorization signatures, they were all perfectly documented. He looked up from the ledger and stared directly at Andre. You signed these transfer orders, Andre. These are your personal authorization codes. He forged them! Yolanda shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical panic. She rushed around the table, trying to physically snatch the ledgers away from the board members. She is framing my son. She hacked the banks. Please, Yolanda. I laughed, a harsh, biting sound. Stop embarrassing yourself. Look at the final page of the audit. I traced the wire transfers from the shell companies directly into Andre's personal offshore accounts. The routing numbers match perfectly. I even included the security camera footage from the banks, showing Andre personally withdrawing the funds in cashier checks. The evidence is absolute and indisputable. Your golden boy is a thief. The atmosphere in this boardroom shifted instantly. The powerful men and women who had just promised to protect the Vanguard family were now staring at Desmond and Andre with unadulterated, murderous rage. They realized that their own personal wealth, their own investments, and their country club legacy had been gutted by the people sitting at the head of the table. The loyalty evaporated in a single second, replaced by the vicious instinct for self-preservation. Desmond, you son of a bitch! Marcus roared, standing up and slamming his fist on the table so hard, the water glasses rattled. You came into this room and asked us for protection while your worthless son was stealing our money. You looked us in the eye and lied. I will see you both in federal prison for this. I will personally call the district attorney. Desmond backed away from the table, his hands raised defensively. Marcus, wait, please. He begged, his voice trembling with sheer terror. I did not know. I swear to you, I had no idea he was moving those funds. We can fix this. I will liquidate my personal assets. I will pay back every single cent to the club. Just do not call the authorities. Please, Marcus, do not destroy my family. You have no assets left to liquidate Desmond, I reminded him coldly, shutting down his final desperate lie. I bought your debt last night. I own your corporate headquarters. I own your mansion. You are completely bankrupt. You do not have a single dime left to repay the millions your son stole from these people. You are completely and utterly finished." The board members began shouting furious threats, demanding immediate police intervention and threatening brutal lawsuits. The room was a chaotic storm of anger and betrayal. The illusion of the Vanguard Empire was shattered into a million irreparable pieces. And right in the center of the storm, Andre finally broke. The pressure, the fear, and the overwhelming reality of his absolute ruin finally crushed him. Andre jumped up from his chair crashing to the floor behind him. He was sobbing wildly, tears and sweat streaming down his face as he frantically waved his hands in the air. "I did not keep it," Andre screamed over the shouting board members, his voice tearing through his throat. "I did not spend the money on myself. I swear to God I did not keep a single dollar. You have to believe me." The entire room fell silent, staring at the weeping, broken man. Desmond grabbed his son by the shoulders, shaking him violently. "What did you do with the money?" Desmond roared, spittle flying from his lips. "Where is the $4 million? "I had to pay them," Andre wailed, dropping to his knees on the hardwood floor. "I owed them so much money from the tables. They said they were going to kill me, Dad. They said they were going to come to the house and kill all of us. I had to pay the syndicate. I gave them everything, but the interest kept growing. It was never enough. They kept demanding more." The heavy mahogany doors of the executive boardroom did not just open, they were violently kicked inward. The thick brass handles smashed against the expensive drywall, leaving deep, fractured indentations in the walls. The furious shouting of the wealthy board members stopped in a single instant. Every single person in the room froze, completely paralyzed, as four men stepped into the country club. These men were not wealthy investors or golf pros. They were dressed in sharp, immaculate dark suits, but the way they moved spoke of brutal, practiced violence. They did not wear name tags or carry briefcases. The heavy, unnatural bulges beneath their tailored jackets made it explicitly clear that they were heavily armed. The air in the opulent room seemed to drop 10 degrees, freezing the blood of every billionaire present. The syndicate had not bothered to wait for a polite bank transfer. They had come to collect their massive debt in person, and they did not care who was in the way. The lead enforcer, a tall, terrifying man with a jagged scar cutting across his jawline, walked slowly past the terrified board members. His dark, dead eyes locked directly onto Andre. Andre was still on his knees, weeping into his own trembling hands, utterly broken by the revelation of his embezzlement. "We are done waiting," the lead enforcer said, his voice a low, rough gravel that vibrated through the polished floorboards. "You owe us $3 million in overdue penalties, Andre. You missed the final extension at midnight. We are not here to discuss payment plans or listen to your pathetic excuses. We are here to collect our money, or we are here to collect you." Andre let out a loud, pathetic whimpering sound, trying to crawl backward under the heavy wooden conference table to hide from his fate. Desmond watched the armed men approach his golden son, and pure animal panic took over his mind. The great patriarch who had just been boasting about his legacy was now sweating profusely. Desmond looked at the heavily armed enforcers, and then he looked at the board members who were actively backing away to protect themselves. Finally, Desmond turned his desperate, cowardly eyes toward me. I saw the exact moment his survival instinct overrode any shred of human decency he had left. I saw the exact same soulless look in his eyes that he had 15 years ago when the house was burning around us. He was going to sacrifice me all over again to save his precious boy. Desmond lunged forward, pointing a shaking, frantic finger directly at my face. "Take her!" Desmond shouted, his voice cracking in a pathetic display of absolute cowardice. "Do not hurt my boy. That woman standing right there is my daughter. She is a billionaire. She just bought this entire building and our corporate headquarters. She has more money than anyone in this entire city. Take her instead. Hold her for ransom. Empty her massive bank accounts. She can pay Andre's debt 10 times over. Just please leave my son alone." The silence that followed his vile declaration was sickening. The wealthy board members stared at Desmond in absolute disgust. He was literally offering his own flesh and blood to violent criminals just to shield the son who had robbed the country club blind. Yolanda stood right beside her husband, nodding frantically, her hands clasped together in desperate agreement. Yes, Yolanda pleaded, stepping behind Desmond to hide herself from the terrifying men. She is the one with the liquid assets. Take her right now. She owes this family for everything we gave her. Take her money and spare my son. I stood at the end of the long mahogany table, watching the two people who brought me into this world actively try to sell my life to a shadow syndicate. They had not changed a single bit. They were the exact same monsters who left a little girl to burn to ashes on a bedroom floor so they could save their male heir. The betrayal did not hurt me anymore. It simply fueled the inferno of my final revenge. I did not scream. I did not flinch or try to run for the door or beg the country club board members for help. I stood perfectly still, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored charcoal suit. I looked down the length of the table at Desmond and Yolanda, who were practically shaking with anticipation, waiting for the armed men to grab me and drag me away. Then I shifted my cold gaze to the lead enforcer. He was standing just a few feet away from Andre, his hand resting casually inside his jacket, where his weapon was holstered. I held the enforcer's stare. I did not blink. I simply gave him a single slow, deliberate nod. The lead enforcer immediately stopped advancing toward the cowering golden boy. He pulled his empty hand out of his jacket and turned away from Andre entirely. He walked the length of the boardroom, his heavy boots thudding against the hardwood floor, until he stood directly in front of me. The entire room held its breath, waiting for him to grab my arms or draw his weapon. Instead, the ruthless enforcer stopped, pressed his feet together, and bowed deeply at the waist. It was a gesture of absolute total respect. "Good morning, Miss Vanguard," the enforcer said, his voice completely devoid of its former menace. "Your instructions have been followed perfectly. The perimeter of the country club is secured and the exits are locked. We are awaiting your final orders." Desmond's jaw dropped so hard it looked like it became unhinged. He stumbled backward, crashing heavily into his leather executive chair. Yolanda let out a strangled gasp, clutching her chest, as if she was suffering a massive heart attack. The elite board members stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, finally realizing the true extent of the absolute power I wielded. "You see, Desmond?" I said, my voice echoing cleanly across the massive silent room. "I told you I bought your corporate debt, but I did not just stop at the legitimate banks. I am a very thorough investor. When I discovered your precious son owed $3 million in overdue penalties to an underground syndicate, I did not call the police. I contacted the heads of the organization directly. I bought out their highest-level debts. I injected massive capital into their legitimate front companies. I became their primary financial backer. These men do not work for the shadows anymore, Desmond. They work for me." I looked down at Andre, who was still trembling on the floor. His expensive suit ruined his face, pale and slick with sheer terror. He looked up at me, and he finally understood that his life literally belonged to me. I owned his massive debt. I owned his entire family. And now I owned the very monsters he had been running from all these years. I reached into my sleek briefcase and pulled out a small, high-definition recording device. I set it on the polished mahogany table, pointing the wide lens directly at my cowering brother. I tapped the digital screen, and a small red light blinked to life, indicating it was recording every single second of this pathetic display. "You have a choice to make, Andre," I said, walking slowly around the table until I was standing right above him. The armed enforcers moved with me, forming an impenetrable wall behind my back. "You can leave this room with these gentlemen right now, and they will extract the $3 million you owe them using whatever creative physical methods they see fit. Or you can look directly into that camera and tell me the absolute truth. I want to know exactly what happened 15 years ago. I want to know how the fire started, the fire that was supposed to kill me." Andre let out a loud, pathetic wail, tears streaming down his face as he looked from the armed enforcers to the blinking red light of the camera. He was completely broken, stripped of every lie and every protection his parents had ever provided. It was an accident. Andre sobbed, his voice echoing miserably through the silent boardroom. I did not mean to burn the house down. I swear to God, Lydia, I just needed money. Dad caught me stealing cash from his private safe in the study. He was going to cut me off entirely. He was going to take everything away from me. I had to create a major distraction. I sneaked into your bedroom while you were asleep. I just wanted to start a small fire in your closet to destroy the house alarm servers so I could blame the missing cash on a burglary. But the heavy curtains caught. The whole room went up so fast. I panicked and ran away. I am sorry, Lydia. I am so sorry. The devastating confession hung heavily in the freezing air. Before anyone could even process the horrifying truth, Yolanda suddenly lunged across the open space. My mother moved with terrifying speed, her face twisted into a mask of pure demonic rage. She raised her hand and struck Andre across the face with a sickeningly loud crack. "Shut up!" she screamed, her voice tearing through the room like shattered glass. "Shut your mouth right now, you stupid boy! You will ruin our legacy!" I stood frozen, staring at my mother's furious face. The truth hit me with the force of a collapsing building. They knew. Desmond and Yolanda had known all along that their golden boy had started the fire. They knew he was a thief and an arsonist, and they still left me to burn alive to protect his secret. Desmond stood paralyzed, staring at his wife with a look of utter incomprehension. Andre whimpered on the floor, clutching his reddened cheek as his mother glared down at him with undisguised hatred. She did not care that he was having a panic attack. She did not care that heavily armed enforcers were standing mere feet away. She only cared that her golden child had just confessed to arson and theft in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. She only cared about her pristine reputation. I stood motionless, letting the horrifying reality wash over me. The flames from 15 years ago seemed to lick at the edges of my vision. My own parents knew. They knew Andre sneaked into my room. They knew he started the fire to cover his tracks after stealing from his own father. They watched the house burn. They watched me fall into the inferno, and they chose to protect their thief of a son. They held a funeral for an empty casket and accepted the condolences of the city, all while knowing the truth. The betrayal was so absolute, so deeply sickening, that it pushed past the boundaries of human emotion and left me feeling entirely hollowed out and weaponized. The elite board members of the country club backed away from the table, their faces pale with shock and disgust. Judge Marcus looked physically ill, his hands shaking as he gripped the back of a leather chair. They had gathered in this room to protect a legacy of black excellence, and instead they were witnessing a den of monsters devouring each other. They finally saw the Vanguard family for what they truly were. Yolanda realized the room was completely lost. She looked at the disgusted faces of the board members. She looked at the armed syndicate enforcers who stood silently behind me awaiting my orders. She looked at Desmond, who was bankrupt and broken, and she looked at Andre, who was weeping on the floor like a pathetic child. Yolanda was a survivor. She was a parasite who always knew exactly when to abandon a dying host. She straightened her pristine white suit, smoothing the fabric with perfectly manicured hands. She composed her features, forcing the frantic panic out of her eyes and replacing it with cold, calculating logic. She turned her back entirely on her husband and her son. She walked slowly down the length of the long mahogany table until she stood just a few feet away from me. "Lydia," she said, her voice dropping to a low conspiratorial whisper. She tried to project an aura of maternal solidarity, an invisible bond between two women who knew how to survive a brutal world. "We do not have to let this destroy everything. Your father was a fool. He was reckless and arrogant, and his blind devotion to that idiot boy on the floor has ruined him. But I am not like Desmond. I am smart. I know when a game is over." I stared at her, feeling absolutely nothing. I did not speak. I let her dig her own grave. Yolanda leaned closer, her expensive floral perfume failing to mask the stench of her desperation. "I have the original insurance documents," she whispered urgently. "I have the files Desmond locked away 15 years ago. I have the undeniable proof of his corporate fraud and his efforts to obstruct the fire investigation. If you hand those files over to the federal prosecutors, Desmond will go to prison for the rest of his natural life. You will have your absolute revenge, and your complete corporate takeover will face zero legal resistance. I can give you the key to his absolute destruction." She paused, letting the weight of her betrayal sink in. She was offering to send her husband of 40 years to a federal penitentiary without a single ounce of hesitation. "All I ask in return is a clean exit." Yolanda continued, her eyes gleaming with ruthless self-preservation. "I want $1 million wired to an account of my choosing. I want safe passage out of this marriage, and I want immunity from any civil lawsuits your private equity firm brings against the Vanguard estate. Give me $1 million, Lydia, and I will hand you Desmond on a silver platter. You and I can walk away from this wreckage and leave these weak men to rot." The sheer audacity of her proposition was breathtaking. A mother trying to extort her resurrected daughter by selling out her husband over a fire that her own son started. It was a masterpiece of narcissistic survival. I looked at Yolanda and allowed a slow, chilling smile to spread across my face. I reached into my tailored jacket and retrieved a small, sleek remote control. I pointed it at the ceiling and pressed a single button. The heavy velvet curtains covering the boardroom windows automatically glided shut, plunging the room into shadows. A massive motorized projector screen descended from the ceiling, dropping down behind the head of the table. A high-definition projector hummed to life, casting a bright, rectangular glow across the room. I walked over to the digital podium built into the mahogany table and inserted a small encrypted flash drive. "You always were the smartest person in the room, Yolanda," I said, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the darkened boardroom. "You always knew how to manipulate the narrative. You always knew how to play the victim. But you made one critical miscalculation. You underestimated my auditing team." I tapped the podium screen. The massive projector illuminated, displaying a series of complex, international banking records. The documents were stamped with the official seals of the Cayman Islands Banking Authority. The detailed spreadsheets stretched 10 feet high, displaying routing numbers, wire transfers, and offshore trust accounts. The board members leaned forward, squinting at the glowing screen. Desmond looked up, his face a mask of total confusion. "Let us talk about the life insurance payout," I announced, pacing slowly across the front of the room. 15 years ago, after my tragic supposed death, the insurance company paid out exactly $2 million to the Vanguard estate. It was a handsome sum for a dead daughter. Desmond, you always claimed that the insurance company fought the claim and that the money was tied up in endless legal red tape. You used that excuse when your real estate firm started bleeding cash. You took out toxic shadow loans because you believed your liquid assets were frozen. Desmond nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the screen. He looked exhausted and defeated. "The lawyer said the payout was held up in probate." Desmond whispered, his voice hollow. "They said it would take years to release the funds. They did not say that," I corrected sharply. "Your lawyers released the $2 million exactly 60 days after my empty casket was lowered into the ground. The money was wired directly into a joint Vanguard holding account, but it did not stay there for long." I tapped the screen again, highlighting a specific sequence of wire transfers. 72 hours after the insurance money cleared, it was moved, I explained, tracing the glowing numbers with a laser pointer. It was broken down into smaller, untraceable amounts and routed through a series of shell companies in Panama. From there, it was transferred into a private, highly secured trust account in the Cayman Islands. A trust account that was deliberately hidden from all domestic tax authorities and completely isolated from the Vanguard family business portfolio. I turned to look directly at Yolanda. Her face had turned the color of ash. Her perfectly manicured hands began to tremble. She took a step backward, shaking her head in silent, frantic denial. "That private offshore trust is registered under the name Yolanda Vance," I stated loudly, emphasizing her maiden name. "You intercepted the blood money, Yolanda. You took the $2 million paid out for your dead daughter and you hid it. You sat back and watched your husband panic as his company starved for capital. You watched Desmond leverage his entire empire and borrow money from dangerous, violent criminals just to keep the lights on. You watched your family spiral into complete financial ruin, and you never said a word because you wanted a private safety net. You let Desmond take the fall for everything while you hoarded a fortune built on my ashes. The boardroom erupted in gasps of sheer disbelief. The level of sociopathic greed was almost impossible to process. Desmond slowly pushed himself up from his chair. He looked like a reanimated corpse. He turned his head and stared at his wife of 40 years, the woman he had built his life around, the woman he had protected. He realized in that agonizing moment that Yolanda had actively orchestrated his destruction. She had let him drown in debt and fear while sitting on millions of dollars. "You stole the money!" Desmond choked out, his voice trembling with a rage so deep it seemed to shake his entire frame. "I borrowed from the syndicate to save this family. I put my life on the line to keep us afloat, and you had the money the whole time. You let me destroy myself." Yolanda backed away from her husband, holding her hands up defensively. "Desmond, please, you have to understand," she pleaded, her voice shrill and panicked. "You were making bad investments. You were throwing money at failing real estate projects. I had to protect my future. I had to make sure I was secure. You would have just lost that money too. I was trying to save us." "You let our daughter burn and then you stole the money from her grave," Desmond roared, lunging toward her. Two armed syndicate enforcers immediately stepped forward, blocking Desmond's path and shoving him forcefully back into his chair. Desmond collapsed, weeping openly, covering his face, as his entire reality was ripped to shreds. He had lost his daughter, his company, his fortune, his freedom, and now he realized his marriage was nothing but a predatory financial arrangement. I turned off the projector and the screen rolled back up into the ceiling. The heavy velvet curtains opened, allowing the morning sunlight to flood back into the ruined boardroom. I looked at the broken, weeping men and the terrified, exposed woman standing before me. I felt a deep, profound sense of closure. The Vanguard legacy was permanently eradicated. At the far end of the boardroom, near the heavy, shattered doors, Brittany stood completely motionless. She had been silent during the entire confrontation, watching the catastrophic implosion of the billionaire family she had married into. She processed the information with cold, brutal clarity. She realized that Desmond was completely bankrupt. She realized that Yolanda was a fraud who would face federal charges for offshore tax evasion and embezzlement. She realized that the syndicate owned all their properties and assets. Most importantly, Brittany realized that Andre, the handsome, wealthy heir she had tethered herself to, was nothing but a broke, pathetic arsonist who was heading straight to a maximum security prison. There were no more trust funds. There were no more country club memberships. There were no more luxury vacations or designer wardrobes. The Vanguard name, which she had wielded like a weapon against anyone she deemed inferior, was now synonymous with criminal disgrace and absolute poverty. Brittany's face twisted into an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She looked down at the massive, flawless diamond wedding ring on her left hand, the ring that Andre had purchased using stolen pension funds. She grabbed the ring and violently yanked it off her finger. She marched forward, her heels stomping aggressively against the hardwood floor. She stopped right in front of Andre, who was still curled on the floor, weeping and clutching his bruised cheek. Brittany looked down at him as if he were a diseased animal. She threw the heavy diamond ring directly at his face. The diamond struck his forehead with a sharp crack before bouncing away across the polished floor. "You are pathetic!" Brittany screamed, her voice echoing with vicious hatred. "You are absolutely disgusting. You lied to me, you weak, miserable coward. You made me believe I was marrying into a dynasty, and you are nothing but a thief." Andre looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen, reaching a trembling hand toward his wife. "Brittany, please do not leave me," he begged, his voice cracking. "I love you. I did it for us. I did it to give you the life you deserved." "Do not touch me, you piece of garbage," Brittany shrieked, kicking his hand away. "You are ghetto trash. You are all just ghetto trash pretending to be old money. You dragged me into this mess, and I will not let you drag me down with you. I am leaving you, Andre. I am taking the kids and I am moving back to Buckhead. I am filing for full legal custody today, and I am going to sue you for every single penny of alimony you will ever earn for the rest of your miserable life." You will never see your children again." She turned around, fixing her designer dress and glaring at the shocked board members. She stomped toward the exit, pushing aggressively past the armed syndicate enforcers who simply watched her with cold amusement. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut behind her, leaving the boardroom in absolute silence. Andre let out a final agonizing wail, curling into a fetal position on the floor. He had nothing left. His wife was gone, his money was gone, his freedom was gone. Yolanda stood frozen, isolated, and exposed, hated by her husband and her son. Desmond remained slumped in his chair, a broken, empty shell of a man waiting for the authorities to arrive. I picked up my leather briefcase, snapping the latches closed. I looked at the lead syndicate enforcer and nodded toward the door. "We are done here," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Make sure they do not leave this room until the federal agents arrive to collect them." I turned and walked out of the country club, leaving the ashes of the Vanguard family behind me forever. I stepped out into the bright Atlanta morning, breathing in the fresh, clean air. The fire that had burned inside me for 15 years was finally extinguished. I was free. I was alive. And I had won. I walked to my car feeling the warm sun on my face, but my victory was only a brief intermission. Brittany was not going to vanish quietly into the background. She was a woman who had built her entire identity on ruthless entitlement, and she absolutely refused to let go of her unearned wealth without a vicious fight. The very next morning, I was sitting in my newly acquired corporate office when Marcus Vance walked in holding a massive stack of legal filings. Brittany had hired the most aggressive, predatory divorce attorneys in the entire state of Georgia. She realized very quickly that Andre was completely bankrupt and facing federal prison time. He had absolutely nothing left for her to take. So she decided to pivot her attack and point her highly paid legal team directly at me. She filed a massive civil lawsuit against me and my private equity firm. The audacity of her claims was genuinely staggering. Brittany claimed that my hostile takeover of the Vanguard Empire was an act of malicious interference. She submitted sworn affidavits stating that my actions had caused her severe emotional distress and entirely ruined her children's generational inheritance. She was literally trying to sue me for the money her husband had stolen and lost. She demanded a full subpoena of all my personal and corporate assets, aiming to drain my accounts to maintain her lavish lifestyle. Brittany did not just keep this in the courtroom. She immediately launched a highly coordinated media smear campaign. She stood on the steps of the Fulton County Courthouse, wearing a modest beige dress completely different from her usual gaudy designer gowns. She held a press conference playing the role of the innocent, helpless mother who was being aggressively bullied by a vengeful billionaire sister-in-law. She squeezed out those fake tears for the local news cameras, claiming she was destitute and terrified for her children. She tried to leverage her elite country club network to freeze me out of Atlanta business circles, telling anyone who would listen that I was a criminal fraud who had stolen her family fortune. She thought her white tears and her victim narrative would be enough to manipulate the legal system into handing her a massive settlement just to make her go away. She thought I would be intimidated by her aggressive legal posturing. She thought I would simply write her a check to avoid a drawn-out public battle. But she clearly had not learned her lesson at the gala. I did not settle and I did not back down. I told Marcus to refuse every single negotiation request. I wanted to meet her in court. 2 weeks later, we walked into the Fulton County Family Court for the preliminary asset hearing. The courtroom was cold and smelled like old wood and floor wax. Brittany sat at the plaintiff table, dabbing her eyes with a tissue looking like a fragile, broken bird. Her high-powered attorney stood up and delivered a passionate, theatrical speech to the judge. He painted me as a ruthless corporate monster who had illegally destroyed a struggling family and stolen the future of 2 innocent children. He demanded that the judge grant immediate access to my financial portfolios to compensate his client for her profound suffering. I sat at the defense table perfectly calm, watching her performance. When her lawyer finally finished, Marcus Vance slowly stood up and buttoned his jacket. He addressed the judge with cold, professional authority. "Your Honor, my client owes the plaintiff absolutely nothing," Marcus stated, his voice ringing clearly through the quiet courtroom. In fact, the plaintiff does not even have the legal standing to claim any portion of the Vanguard family assets due to a prenuptial agreement she signed 12 years ago. Brittany scoffed loudly from her seat, shaking her head. That is a lie, she told the judge. There is no prenuptial agreement. It does not exist. She was so confident because she thought she had destroyed it. Years ago, when Desmond first began hiding assets, he ordered all family members to sign strict legal protections. Brittany had famously thrown a fit and later sneaked into Desmond's home office to shred the physical copy of the document, believing that would void the contract. But Desmond was a paranoid man. He never trusted anyone, especially not the woman who married his golden child. Marcus opened his briefcase and handed a certified document to the court bailiff. My client's forensic tech team recovered the original digital backups from Desmond Vanguard's secure private servers, Marcus explained. The agreement explicitly states that in the event of financial crimes committed by her husband, or in the event of divorce, Brittany Vanguard walks away with zero alimony and zero claim to any corporate assets. She gets absolutely nothing. Brittany's jaw dropped. The fragile victim facade shattered instantly, replaced by pure, panicked fury. You cannot do this, she yelled, standing up from her chair. That document is invalid. I am an innocent victim in all of this. Andre hid his crimes from me. I had no idea he was stealing money. I am destitute because of him. I finally stood up from my chair. I looked directly at the judge and then turned my gaze to Brittany. Innocent, I asked, my voice echoing in the large room. You have never been innocent, Brittany. You just let other people do the dirty work while you reap the rewards. I signaled to Marcus, who handed another thick stack of files to the bailiff to pass to the judge. Let us talk about the $4 million Andre embezzled from the country club pension fund, I said, pacing slowly toward the center of the room. When I audited the offshore accounts, I noticed something very interesting. Andre did not give all of that stolen money to the Shadow Syndicate. He was far too greedy for that. He only gave them enough to keep them at bay while he funneled the rest of the stolen pension funds into a separate hidden account in the Cayman Islands. Brittany froze completely. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin looking like chalk. Her aggressive posture collapsed and she sank slowly back down into her chair. And that specific offshore account, I continued loudly, making sure the court stenographer captured every single word, was not registered under Andre's name. It was registered under your maiden name, Brittany. I found the wire transfers carrying your digital signature. I found the real estate deeds. You used the stolen country club pension money to secretly purchase a luxury villa in the south of France and a high-rise penthouse in Dubai. You knew exactly what Andre was doing. You helped him launder the stolen cash so you could build your own secret real estate portfolio while the people at your country club lost their retirement funds. Her high-powered shark of an attorney stared at the documents the judge handed back to him. He read the offshore routing numbers and the property deeds. He realized in a matter of seconds that his client had completely lied to him and that she was actively involved in a massive federal wire fraud scheme. He literally took a step away from her at the table, creating physical distance between himself and a sinking ship. Your Honor, the attorney stammered, packing his briefcase. I was completely unaware of these documents. I need to formally request to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiff immediately. The judge slammed his gavel down, staring at Brittany with absolute disgust. Ms. Vanguard, the judge said, his voice booming with fury. You came into my courtroom claiming to be a destitute victim while actively hiding millions of dollars in stolen assets overseas. You have committed perjury in my court and you are clearly complicit in a massive federal embezzlement scheme. The judge looked up and signaled to the two armed court bailiffs standing by the doors. Take her into custody, the judge ordered. I am holding her in contempt of court, and I am contacting the federal prosecutor's office to pursue immediate charges for wire fraud and conspiracy. The bailiffs moved quickly, marching down the aisle and grabbing Brittany by the arms. She completely lost her mind. The elite society wife who thought she was untouchable started screaming and thrashing wildly. Get your hands off me, she shrieked, kicking at the bailiff's legs. You cannot do this to me. I am a mother. She ruined my life. She set me up. "Lydia, you horrible, vicious witch, I will kill you." Her perfectly styled hair fell into her face as the officers forcefully twisted her arms behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the room was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. They dragged her screaming and sobbing toward the holding cell doors, completely stripping away the last remaining shred of her unearned privilege. I stood there watching her being hauled away, feeling the heavy satisfaction of absolute justice. I had dismantled the golden boy and I had destroyed his wicked wife. But the game was not entirely over. While Brittany's frantic screams echoed down the courthouse hallway, my cell phone vibrated sharply in the pocket of my blazer. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was an urgent, high-priority red alert from my private security and financial tracking team. I opened the encrypted message and read the text quickly. Desmond Vanguard has breached the final failsafe. My eyes narrowed as I read the detailed report. Desmond the coward who had tried to hand me over to the syndicate had not just been sitting quietly waiting for the authorities. He had found one last hidden corporate holding account that my auditors had not yet frozen. He used an illegal backdoor proxy to drain the remaining $200,000 in liquid cash. The alert confirmed he was currently speeding down Interstate 85 in a stolen rental car, heading directly toward Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, carrying a highly sophisticated forged passport under an assumed name. Desmond was making a desperate run for the border. He was trying to escape the wreckage he created and vanish into the wind before the federal agents could put him behind bars. I slowly slipped the phone back into my pocket. A cold, dark smile touched the corners of my mouth. Marcus looked at me, noticing the shift in my demeanor. "Everything all right?" Marcus asked, packing up his briefcase. "Everything is perfect," I replied, turning toward the courtroom exit. "But we need to make a quick stop at the airport. My father is trying to take a flight, and I really need to see him off." The drive to the private airfield on the outskirts of Atlanta was a blur of gray highway and focused anticipation. I drove my black SUV past the rusted chain-link fences and the dilapidated hangars that lined the forgotten airstrip. Desmond always thought he was smarter than everyone else, choosing an obscure private charter tarmac instead of a major commercial hub. He thought he could slip away like a ghost in the wind, taking his remaining stolen cash and starting over somewhere untouchable. I floored the accelerator as the runway came into view. The tires screeched against the cracked asphalt as I swerved violently onto the landing strip. Right there in the distance, the silver engines of a sleek Gulfstream jet were already whining, preparing for takeoff. Desmond was power-walking across the tarmac, dragging a heavy leather duffel bag, his shoulders hunched against the morning wind. He was wearing a cheap trench coat and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. A pathetic disguise for a man who used to demand the spotlight wherever he went. I slammed the brakes, sending the SUV skidding in a sharp sideways arc until it came to a complete halt directly in front of the nose of the jet, blocking the runway entirely. The jet engines whined down into a low grumble. I stepped out of the vehicle, the wind whipping my hair across my face. Desmond froze, dropping his heavy duffel bag onto the tarmac. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he recognized me. He looked around wildly, searching for a way around my vehicle, but there was nowhere to run. I walked slowly toward him, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the pavement. He looked so small now, so incredibly fragile and pathetic. This was the great Desmond Vanguard, the untouchable patriarch of Atlanta, reduced to a sweating, terrified fugitive trying to scurry onto a plane with a fake passport. "Lydia," he stammered, his voice shaking as he took a step backward. "What are you doing here? You have everything. You took it all. Just let me go." I stopped a few feet away from him, crossing my arms over my chest. I wanted to look him in the eyes before he disappeared. I told him, my voice cold and flat. I wanted to see the exact moment the great architect of my misery finally realized his foundation had completely collapsed. Desmond's face contorted. He knew he was trapped, so he resorted to the only weapon he had left. He tried to gaslight me. He stood up a little straighter, trying to summon the old patriarchal authority that used to make me cower as a child. He tried to reframe his unspeakable betrayal into a twisted narrative of parental love. You think you understand what happened 15 years ago, Lydia? He said, his voice taking on a sick tone of dark affection. You think I am a monster for leaving you in that burning house, but you do not see the bigger picture. You never did. I saw Andre panic. I saw what he did when he started that fire, but Andre was weak. He was always weak and pathetic and fragile. He needed me to survive. You did not. I stared at him, letting the sheer insanity of his words wash over me. He was actually trying to justify leaving me to burn alive. I left you in that fire because I knew you were strong enough to survive it, Desmond said, stepping closer, trying to look deeply into my eyes, hoping I would somehow believe this deranged fantasy. You were the strong one, Lydia. You had the fire inside you. I knew if anyone could walk out of those flames and build something incredible, it was you. I sacrificed you because you were the only one who could take it. Look at you now. Look at the massive empire you built. You would never have become this powerful if I had not forged you in that fire. I made you into a god, Lydia. You should be thanking me for what I did. I did not scream. I did not strike him, even though the urge to rip his throat out was a physical pressure in my chest. I just stared at the pathetic, delusional man standing on the tarmac, trying to spin his cowardly attempted murder into some sort of twisted, fatherly blessing. You really believe your own lies, Desmond? I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You really believe you are some kind of mastermind architect of my destiny? Let me make something absolutely clear to you right now. You did not forge me. You did not make me strong. You just threw me away because I was inconvenient. I built myself in spite of you. While you were busy covering up Andre's crimes and funneling stolen money into offshore accounts to maintain your pathetic country club facade, I was in the dirt. I was working 3 jobs. I was teaching myself high-level corporate finance while sleeping in my car. I was tracking every single one of your shell companies, analyzing your vulnerabilities, and slowly, systematically buying up every single debt you accrued. Desmond shook his head, his eyes darting toward the jet door. I have to go, Lydia, he muttered, reaching down to grab the handle of his duffel bag. You won, I admit it. Now move your car so I can leave. I did not move. I just smiled. You built a house of cards, Desmond. I told him, stepping closer so he could not escape my gaze. You borrowed from shadow syndicates because legitimate banks stopped trusting you. You let Yolanda hoard your insurance payouts because you were too weak to control your own wife. You let Andre bleed the pension fund dry because you were too arrogant to audit your own son. You let Brittany spend stolen money on overseas real estate because you were entirely blind to the rot inside your own home. You did not create a dynasty. You created a graveyard and you dragged yourself into the dirt. I did not come here today to stop you from flying away, Desmond. His hand froze on the duffel bag handle. He looked up at me, confusion mixing with his terror. What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely a squeak. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen and held it up so he could clearly see the digital document displayed. It was the flight manifest for the private charter. I scrolled down past the pilot assignments and the passenger list until I reached the ownership registration of the charter company itself. Vanguard Aviation Holding Company, a subsidiary of my primary investment firm. I did not come to stop you from flying, Desmond. I repeated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I came to watch you fall. I own this airstrip. I own this jet. I own the charter company that you booked your pathetic escape flight with. You used a fake passport and a proxy buyer, but my security algorithms flagged your booking the second you submitted the payment. You walked right into my trap. I have owned this entire facility for over a month, just waiting for the day you would try to run. Desmond stared at the screen, his face turning the color of wet ash. He looked from the phone to the jet, and then back to me. His breath was coming in short, frantic gasps as he realized there was no escape. Every single exit was sealed, and I held the keys. The door of the Gulfstream jet suddenly opened with a loud mechanical hiss. The metal stairs folded down onto the tarmac. Desmond turned toward the plane, hoping for a final, desperate chance at salvation. But it was not a flight attendant stepping out of the cabin. It was the pilot. He was wearing a standard white uniform shirt with epaulets, but he was holding something metallic and heavy in his right hand. As the pilot walked down the stairs, the morning sun caught the unmistakable gleam of heavy steel handcuffs. Desmond took a staggering step backward, dropping his bag entirely. The pilot walked calmly across the tarmac, stopping right beside me. He did not say a word. He just stood there tapping the handcuffs against his palm, staring at Desmond with complete contempt. Before Desmond could even turn around to run, the wail of sirens shattered the morning quiet. From the far end of the airstrip, a dozen dark federal vehicles roared onto the tarmac. They surrounded us in seconds, their tires screeching as heavily armed federal agents poured out of the SUVs. They had their weapons drawn, shouting commands that echoed over the whining jet engines. I had tipped them off to his exact location and provided the complete digital dossiers of his interstate fraud and massive tax evasion. Desmond was violently grabbed and thrown hard against the hood of my car, his fake passport fluttering to the ground. I stood there watching as they locked the handcuffs tightly around his wrists, pulling him up and reading him his rights. It was the ultimate victory. I had finally destroyed the man who destroyed my life. But right as they shoved him into the back of a federal vehicle, my phone vibrated aggressively in my hand. It was an emergency call from my personal assistant. I answered it immediately, expecting an update on the corporate takeover. Instead, I heard my assistant sobbing hysterically. "Ms. Vanguard," she cried, her voice cracking with sheer terror. "He is here. Andre is in your penthouse. He broke through the security doors and he has a gun pointed directly at my head. He says if you do not come alone right now, he is going to kill me." The drive from the private airstrip to my downtown penthouse was a blur of calculated speed and ice-cold focus. I did not panic. Panic was an emotion reserved for the weak and the unprepared. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, weaving my heavy armored vehicle through the thick Atlanta traffic. My mind processed the variables with absolute mechanical precision. Andre was cornered. He had watched his entire fraudulent empire collapse in a single morning. His wife had abandoned him, his father was in federal custody, and his mother was facing total ruin. He had nothing left to lose, and that made him incredibly dangerous. But he was also a coward and an addict. I pulled into the underground parking garage of my residential skyscraper, the tires squealing against the polished concrete. I bypassed the main security desk, swiping my biometric access card to enter the private elevator reserved exclusively for my top-floor penthouse. The high-speed elevator shot upward, the digital floor numbers flashing rapidly on the display panel. I adjusted my suit jacket and took a slow, deep breath. I knew exactly what kind of monster was waiting for me. I knew exactly how to break him. When the metallic doors finally slid open, I stepped directly into the foyer of my own home. The scene before me was a masterpiece of pathetic desperation. The immaculate modern living space had been completely ransacked. Expensive glass vases were shattered across the hardwood floor, and velvet cushions were thrown everywhere. The pristine environment I had built was desecrated by the filthy hands of a desperate addict. Standing in the center of the wreckage was Andre. He looked absolutely deranged. His designer clothes were torn and stained with sweat. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, the pupils blown out from whatever heavy narcotics he had ingested to fuel this final act of sheer madness. He was shaking violently, but his right hand was gripping a heavy black pistol. The barrel of the weapon was pressed hard against the temple of my personal assistant. She was kneeling on the floor, sobbing quietly, her hands raised in the air, completely paralyzed by terror. Andre jerked his head toward me as I stepped out of the elevator. He tightened his grip on the gun and let out a harsh, jagged laugh that sounded like tearing metal. "You really thought you won, Lydia?" he shouted, his voice cracking with manic hysteria. "You thought you could just walk in here and take my life away. You destroyed everything. I had the perfect life. I was the heir to the Vanguard Empire. Everyone loved me. Everyone respected me. You were supposed to be dead. You were supposed to stay dead and let me have what was rightfully mine." He was sweating so profusely that drops were falling from his chin onto my assistant's shoulder. He waved his free hand, wildly gesturing to the ruined penthouse. You ruined my marriage, Lydia. Brittany left me. My father is gone. The syndicate is going to torture me until I die. It is all your fault. Every single piece of this is your fault. But I am not going down alone. You are going to fix this right now. He reached into his torn pocket and threw a crumpled piece of paper onto the floor. It landed a few feet away from my shoes. That is a secure crypto wallet routing number, Andre sneered, his eyes darting frantically around the room. You are going to transfer $10 million into that account right now. You are going to do it while I watch. If you do not transfer the funds in the next 5 minutes, I will blow her brains all over your expensive artwork. And then I will kill you. I will finish what I started 15 years ago. Transfer the money, Lydia. Do it right now or we both die in this room. I stood completely still looking at the crumpled paper on the floor, and then shifting my gaze to my brother's terrified, bloodshot eyes. He was panting heavily, holding the gun with a white-knuckled grip, hoping his desperate display of violence would force me into submission. He expected me to beg. He expected me to cry and frantically transfer my wealth to save a life. He thought he could bully me the way he bullied everyone else in his miserable, pathetic existence. But I was not the little girl he had left to burn. I was the architect of his absolute destruction. I did not even look at the piece of paper. I looked straight through him. You are not a killer, Andre. I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady, slicing through the heavy tension in the room. You are a coward. You have always been a coward. You hire other people to do your dirty work, or you strike when no one is looking. You do not have the spine to pull that trigger while looking me in the eye. My assistant whimpered softly on the floor, but I kept my gaze locked on my brother. Shut up! Andre screamed, pressing the gun harder against her head. I will do it, Lydia. Do not test me. I have nothing left to lose. Transfer the money right now. You are not getting a single dime, I replied, taking a slow, deliberate step into the living room. You are fundamentally incapable of understanding the situation you are in. You think you have cornered me in my own home. You think bringing a weapon into my sanctuary gives you the upper hand. You have spent your entire life believing that force and entitlement can solve your problems, but you are not playing a game against Desmond anymore. You are playing against me. I raised my left hand and tapped the digital screen of my smartwatch. I entered a secure biometric code and pressed the master execution command. A loud mechanical siren blared through the penthouse, immediately followed by the heavy grinding sound of industrial machinery. Thick, reinforced steel shutters rapidly descended over the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, plunging the room into twilight. Solid titanium barricades slammed down over the elevator doors, and the main entrance locking into place with a deafening metallic thud. The entire penthouse was instantly transformed into an impenetrable fortress vault. The emergency red backup lights flickered on, casting long, ominous shadows across the walls. Andre spun around wildly, pointing his gun at the locked doors and then back at me. His chest heaved with fresh panic as he realized the environment had completely changed. What did you just do? He yelled, his voice pitching into a hysterical squeal. Open the doors, Lydia. Open the doors right now. The lockdown protocol is permanently engaged, I explained, pacing slowly across the room, my voice echoing in the sealed vault. Nobody can get in, and nobody can get out. You wanted my attention, Andre. You have it completely. You are trapped in a steel box with the sister you tried to murder. Let us talk about your brilliant escape plan. I pointed to the crumpled paper on the floor. $10 million in an untraceable crypto wallet. It sounds very sophisticated for a man who failed basic accounting. But you are predictable. I knew you would try to run, and I knew you would use the underground connections you made through your gambling debts. You bought that crypto wallet routing number from a fixer in the Shadow Syndicate last night. You paid a premium for it thinking it would guarantee your invisible exit. But you forgot who owns the syndicate now. Andre's mouth fell open. He lowered the gun slightly, staring at me with a look of dawning horror. The drugs in his system were fighting a losing battle against the sheer magnitude of his reality. That crypto address is a honeypot, I told him, shaking my head in pure disgust. It is an encrypted trap designed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I set it up and I ordered the syndicate fixer to sell it to you. The second you try to access those funds, every single federal agency in the country will instantly track your exact geolocation. You did not buy an escape route, Andre. You bought a digital tracking collar. You have nowhere to run. There are no private islands waiting for you. There is no luxury penthouse in Dubai. There is only a federal prison cell with your name on it. You are entirely out of options. Andre let out a pathetic guttural noise, stumbling backward, as if I had physically struck him. He looked at the heavy steel shutters covering the windows and the titanium barricade blocking the elevator. The realization that he was totally defeated finally crushed the last remaining fragments of his fractured mind. The gun in his hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it straight. "You ruined me," he wept, dropping to his knees. His hold on my assistant loosened completely. She immediately scrambled away across the floor, sobbing and hiding behind a heavy marble pillar. "You took everything, Lydia. Why did you have to come back? Why could you not just stay dead?" Andre was completely broken, weeping uncontrollably as the dark reality of his eternal imprisonment settled heavily on his shoulders. He scrambled backward across the polished hardwood floor, desperately trying to put distance between us. His chaotic, flailing limbs knocked into a large, freestanding, decorative ethanol fireplace positioned near the center of the room. The heavy glass and steel structure tipped over with a loud crash, spilling highly flammable liquid ethanol directly across the expensive rugs. The fuel splashed against the exposed electrical wiring of a shattered lamp. A bright, violent spark ignited instantly. A wall of furious orange flames erupted between us, roaring to life and stretching toward the high ceiling. The sudden, intense heat filled the sealed penthouse. The blazing inferno rapidly spread across the spilled fuel, completely blocking the only path toward the locked elevator doors. Andre dropped his heavy weapon, staring into the roaring flames with wide, terrified eyes. The sight of the rapidly spreading fire triggered a massive psychological collapse. The horrific trauma of the inferno he had started 15 years ago came rushing back, paralyzing him completely. He was trapped in a burning room with no escape, and the ghosts of his past had finally come to collect their ultimate debt. History was repeating itself in a spectacular blaze of absolute poetic justice. The ethanol spread like a living, breathing entity across the wide expanse of the imported silk rugs. The liquid fuel ignited with a ferocious swoosh, sending a wall of blue and orange flames skyrocketing toward the vaulted ceiling. The intense heat hit my face, instantly drying the moisture in my eyes, but I refused to blink. I stood perfectly still, watching the magnificent destruction of my own carefully curated sanctuary. The custom velvet furniture, the priceless modern art hanging on the walls, and the polished hardwood floors were all being devoured by the hungry inferno. It was a spectacular sacrifice, but I considered it a minor expense in the grand scheme of my absolute vengeance. Andre was entirely consumed by panic. The heavy black pistol slipped from his trembling, sweaty fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. He did not even try to pick it up. The weapon was completely useless against the roaring wall of fire that was rapidly encircling him. The narcotic energy that had fueled his violent home invasion completely vanished. It was replaced by a primal, suffocating terror that stripped away every ounce of his unearned arrogance. He backed away from the flames, his arms raised defensively across his face, as if he could physically push the heat away. The thick black smoke began to billow outward, banking heavily against the ceiling and rolling down the walls like a dark, toxic wave. The penthouse ventilation system had completely shut down during the security lockdown, sealing the toxic fumes inside the vault. Andre started to hack and cough violently, his chest heaving as he inhaled the poisonous air. His expensive designer clothes were stained with soot and sweat clinging to his trembling body. He stumbled backward and his knees buckled. He crashed onto the floor, crawling away from the approaching fire like a frightened, wounded animal. He looked up at me through the shimmering distortion of the heat waves. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, pleading for a mercy he absolutely did not deserve. He was no longer the ruthless corporate executive or the dangerous drug addict holding a gun to an innocent woman. He had reverted completely to the pathetic, helpless little boy he had always been. The flames triggered a massive psychological collapse. The horrific trauma of the fire he had started 15 years ago came rushing back, shattering his fragile mind. He saw the ghosts of his past dancing in the flames, and he knew he was entirely powerless. "Lydia," he screamed, his voice raw and cracking over the deafening roar of the fire. "Lydia, please help me." He was gasping for air, clawing at his own throat as the thick smoke filled his lungs. "Please," he begged, sobbing hysterically, his face smeared with ash and tears. "I do not want to die. I do not want to burn. Help me, Lydia. You have to help me. I am your brother." I watched him writhe on the floor, offering absolutely no comfort. I watched him choke and beg, looking exactly like the helpless victim he had always pretended to be. But this time there was no Desmond vanguard to swoop in and carry him to safety. There was no highly paid public relations team to spin his cowardly actions into a story of survival. There was only the brutal, undeniable reality of his own pathetic weakness. He had brought a deadly weapon into my home. He had threatened to murder my terrified assistant. He had demanded my hard-earned wealth to fund his cowardly escape. And now he was begging for his miserable life. The roaring flames created a terrifying symphony of destruction, drowning out the sound of his frantic sobbing. He rolled onto his stomach, coughing up dark soot, reaching a trembling hand toward me through the growing inferno. "Please, Liddy," he gasped, using the childhood nickname he had not spoken in 2 decades. "Please do not leave me here. Do not let me burn." I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the broken man crawling on the floor. I did not feel any sudden urge to forgive his endless betrayals or rescue him from the very consequences he had created. My assistant was still cowering behind the heavy marble pillar, coughing quietly into her sleeve, her eyes wide with absolute shock and terror. I turned away from the fire and grabbed her firmly by the arm, pulling her up from the floor. "Follow me," I told her, my voice steady and commanding, cutting through the chaos of the burning room. I led her away from the spreading inferno, toward the far wall of the penthouse. This residential fortress was built to my exact specifications, and I had anticipated every possible disaster, including the total destruction of the main living area. I pressed my palm against a hidden biometric scanner, disguised as a sleek modern art installation on the wall. The wall immediately slid open, revealing a massive fire-retardant glass partition and a reinforced emergency panic corridor. I pushed my terrified assistant into the cool, secure zone. "Stay behind the glass," I ordered her, pointing to the sealed hallway. "The ventilation system in there operates on an entirely independent grid, and the walls are reinforced with titanium. You will be perfectly safe." I did not step into the corridor with her. Instead, I turned back to face the burning room. I walked calmly over to a red emergency panel recessed into the hallway wall. I shattered the glass cover with the heel of my shoe and pulled out a heavy industrial fire blanket. It was thick and dense, coated in advanced chemical suppressants designed to smother high-temperature blazes. I walked back toward the edge of the inferno, holding the heavy blanket in my hands. The heat was absolutely blistering now, searing my skin and making my eyes water. The air was so thick with dark, toxic smoke that I could barely see the opposite end of the vast living room. Andre was still on the floor, coughing violently, his face pressed against the scorching hardwood, trying to find a tiny pocket of breathable air. He looked up at me as I approached the edge of the flames. A brief, desperate flicker of hope crossed his pathetic, soot-stained face. He actually thought I was coming to save him. He thought I was going to risk my own life to drag him through the fire and carry him to safety. He truly believed that after everything he had done, he was still magically entitled to my protection. He thought the fundamental rules of the universe dictated that the golden boy must always survive, no matter who had to burn in his place. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still, just inches from the roaring flames. I looked down at him, feeling the intense heat washing over my face. I remembered the burning house 15 years ago. I remembered the crushing weight of the falling wooden beams and the agonizing realization that my own father had deliberately left me behind. Desmond had pushed me into the fire to save this worthless excuse for a man. Desmond had decided that Andre was the future and I was nothing but collateral damage. I could easily let history repeat itself right now. I could simply step back into the secure corridor, let the glass doors seal shut, and watch the flames consume him entirely. I could let him turn to ash and claim to the authorities that it was a tragic home invasion accident. I could finally balance the scales of our childhood and erase him from the earth. The temptation to let him burn was incredibly powerful. But I was not Desmond Vanguard. I was not a cowardly monster who murdered their own blood to solve a problem. I was infinitely better than them. I was stronger than them. And I wanted Andre to live long enough to experience the absolute destruction of his legacy. I did not push him into the fire, but I was certainly not going to carry him out. I lifted the heavy industrial fire blanket and tossed it through the shimmering heat. It landed in a crumpled heap right in front of his knees. Andre stared at the blanket and then looked up at me, his eyes wide with profound confusion. I raised my hand and pointed slowly toward the heavy steel emergency stairwell door located on the far side of the burning room. It was glowing faintly through the thick black smoke. "Save yourself, golden boy," I told him, my voice cold and loud enough to pierce through the roaring flames. "If you can." I did not wait to see if he had the strength or the courage to crawl toward the blanket. I simply turned my back on him and walked away. I stepped into the secure emergency corridor alongside my trembling assistant and pressed the lockdown button. The heavy fire-retardant glass partition slid shut, sealing us inside the safe zone and completely muting the deafening roar of the fire. Through the thick, reinforced glass, I watched Andre struggling to pull the heavy blanket over his shoulders. He was crying and choking, crawling desperately through the wreckage of my beautiful penthouse toward the distant exit. It was the very first time in his entire miserable life that he actually had to fight for his own survival. I did not feel any sympathy watching him suffer. I just felt the cold, clean satisfaction of absolute closure. I guided my assistant down the private emergency stairwell, leaving the inferno far behind us. The thick concrete walls of the stairwell were cool and silent, providing a stark and peaceful contrast to the fiery chaos upstairs. We walked steadily downward, descending through the heart of the residential skyscraper until we finally pushed open the heavy ground floor exit doors. The cool morning air hit my face, smelling faintly of impending rain and heavy city exhaust. The street outside the building was a chaotic sea of flashing red and blue lights. The wail of fire engine sirens echoed loudly off the surrounding glass and steel buildings. Federal agents and local police officers had already established a massive security perimeter around the block. Heavily armored tactical teams and emergency medical crews were swarming the main entrance of the building, preparing to breach the lobby. I stood on the sidewalk watching the highly coordinated emergency response with perfect icy calm. Minutes later, a team of paramedics burst through the shattered main lobby doors, dragging a bright yellow rescue stretcher. Strapped tightly to the gurney was Andre. He was severely burned, his expensive clothes completely melted, and his skin covered in black soot and ugly, blistering wounds. He was coughing violently, but his chest was rising and falling rapidly. He had somehow managed to drag himself out of the flames. He had survived the fire. But the exact moment the stretcher cleared the lobby doors, two armed federal agents stepped forward and locked heavy steel handcuffs directly onto the metal rails of the gurney. He was not just being treated as a burn victim. He was immediately placed under full police custody for armed robbery and felony arson. I watched them load his pathetic broken body into the back of the waiting ambulance. He had survived the flames only to lose his freedom forever. 6 months had passed since the flames consumed my penthouse and reduced my brother to a broken, shattered shell of a man. The heavy, polished oak doors of the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta swung open with a resounding thud, echoing through the vast marble corridor. The air conditioning inside the massive room was freezing, but the tension radiating from the packed gallery was completely suffocating. I sat quietly in the front row of the spectator seating, watching the slow, pathetic procession entering the room. Desmond, Yolanda, Andre, and Brittany were all walking in a single defeated line. They were wearing drab beige and bright orange prison jumpsuits. The heavy steel shackles around their wrists and ankles clinked together, echoing loudly in the completely silent courtroom. It was a stark and humiliating contrast to the tailored designer suits and imported silk gowns they used to wear like armor to intimidate the world. It was the final sentencing phase of a criminal trial that had captivated the entire country. The Vanguard family empire was completely exposed as a massive criminal syndicate operating behind the guise of elite corporate success. Now they were making one last desperate attempt to save themselves from maximum federal prison sentences. Their highly paid defense attorneys stood up one by one, attempting to paint a tragic and highly sympathetic picture for the jury. They knew the evidence was insurmountable, so they opted for pure emotional manipulation. Desmond walked to the podium first, dragging his chained feet across the carpet. His hair was completely gray now, and his shoulders were permanently hunched, carrying the invisible weight of his ruin. He looked directly at the jury box and actually managed to squeeze out fake tears. He played the ultimate victim card, spinning a masterful web of deception. He blamed the intense systemic pressure of maintaining a minority-owned corporate empire in the ruthless business world of the South. He claimed he was forced to make impossible illegal choices just to keep his employees paid and his family afloat in a hostile economy. He spun a delusional narrative portraying himself as a tragic hero who was victimized by aggressive banks and shadowy predatory lenders. He asked the judge for mercy, claiming his intentions were always pure, even if his methods were terribly flawed. Yolanda was next to address the court. She sat at the defense table, sobbing loudly into a cheap paper tissue, completely abandoning her stoic matriarch persona. She blamed severe generational family trauma and the extreme psychological weight of high society expectations for her complicity. She claimed she was completely ignorant of the financial crimes and the offshore money laundering operations. She painted herself as a devoted, innocent mother who was just trying to hold her fractured family together through incredibly difficult times. She even tried to subtly blame me, claiming I was a deeply disturbed, rebellious child who had manipulated the legal system to steal their wealth and destroy their home out of petty jealousy. She begged the judge to let her go home, claiming her health was failing rapidly and she posed no threat to society. Andre sat slouched in his chair, looking absolutely wretched and small. Thick, shiny burn scars covered the left side of his neck and both of his hands from the penthouse fire. He played the role of the helpless, broken son pushed to the brink of insanity. His defense attorney blamed his severe drug addiction and the crushing, heavy burden of living up to his father's impossible, demanding standards. Andre wept openly, claiming the fire was a terrible accident, and he never truly meant to hurt anyone when he broke into my home and held a loaded gun to my assistant's head. He blamed the heavy narcotics and the extreme stress of his impending bankruptcy for his temporary loss of sanity. He pleaded for a medical rehabilitation facility instead of a federal penitentiary, claiming he just needed help to become a better man. Brittany sat right next to him, looking pale and gaunt, completely stripped of her expensive makeup and her unearned country club arrogance. She played the helpless, naive suburban wife who was terrorized by her dominant husband and forced to sign offshore banking documents under extreme emotional duress. She cried about her children and begged the judge not to take a mother away from her babies. They were using every single ounce of their remaining charm to manipulate the judge into granting them minimum security facilities and early parole. They spun a pathetic web of lies, blaming the economy, the banks, their trauma, and above all, they blamed me. They painted me as the vengeful, greedy monster who orchestrated their downfall out of pure malicious spite just to steal the family crown. The judge finally silenced the defense attorneys and called me to the podium to deliver my formal victim impact statement. The entire courtroom held its breath as I stood up and smoothed the front of my tailored black blazer. I walked slowly past the defense tables without giving them a single glance, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my expression entirely unreadable. I stepped up to the microphone, adjusting it slightly to match my height. I looked directly at the judge, and then slowly turned my cold gaze to the jury box. I did not cry. I did not yell. I did not put on a theatrical performance for the cameras like my family had just done. I spoke with absolute clarity and precision, letting the cold, hard truth shatter their fragile, carefully constructed illusions. I told the court that the four people sitting at the defense tables were not victims of systemic pressure or generational family trauma. I systematically dismantled their staggering hypocrisy piece by piece, leaving no room for doubt or sympathy. I detailed exactly how Desmond and Yolanda built a toxic legacy entirely obsessed with status over substance. I told the jury that Desmond did not commit federal wire fraud to survive a tough economic climate. He committed massive embezzlement so he could buy luxury sports cars, exclusive country club memberships, and sprawling real estate properties. They stole pension funds from hardworking, innocent people who trusted them just to maintain the shallow illusion of absolute superiority in their elite social circles. They built their empire on the broken backs of the very community they pretended to uplift. I turned my body slightly and looked directly at Andre, making sure he could not look away from me. I reminded the court that he violently broke into my secure home, held a loaded gun to an innocent woman's head, and demanded $10 million in untraceable cryptocurrency. He did not do that because of his father's high standards or a difficult childhood. He did it because he was an entitled, violent coward who believed he could simply take whatever he wanted by force without ever facing a single consequence. I shifted my gaze to Brittany and reminded the court that she happily spent stolen pension money on flawless diamonds and luxury penthouses in Dubai while pretending to be an innocent, struggling mother who knew nothing about her husband's illicit business. I shredded their egos, leaving them absolutely naked before the law and the public. I explained that true strength is not built by stepping on the throats of others and burying your own blood in the dirt to hide your failures. Then I delivered the final devastating blow, the absolute ultimate payoff for decades of suffering and betrayal. I turned my attention back to Desmond, leaning slightly closer to the microphone so my voice would carry to the very back of the massive gallery. I knew his entire identity was permanently tied to his vast wealth and his prestigious, commanding name. I announced to the court that during the 6 months since their arrest, my private equity firm had been incredibly busy operating behind the scenes. I told them I had legally acquired every single one of their seized assets through a secure federal auction. I bought the massive Vanguard family mansion where I was raised and discarded. I bought the remaining corporate holdings and commercial real estate. I bought the luxury cars, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, and every single piece of property the government had frozen and liquidated. Desmond's head snapped up, his eyes widening in total disbelief as he realized the sheer magnitude of my financial victory. But I did not keep any of it, I told the silent, breathless courtroom. I did not want their tainted, dirty money polluting my clean empire. I liquidated every single piece of their pathetic, fraudulent legacy. I leveled their empire to the ground legally, systematically, and permanently. I told Desmond that he had absolutely nothing left to return to when his sentence was finally over. The Vanguard name meant nothing in Atlanta anymore. It was completely synonymous with fraud, failure, and utter public disgrace. The physical properties they worshipped were gone, the bank accounts were drained, and their powerful influence was entirely erased from the city. Yolanda let out a loud, tragic wail, covering her face with her trembling hands, as she realized her precious mansion and her elite social standing were actually gone forever. Desmond just slumped forward in his chair, completely broken his spirit, entirely crushed by the sheer reality of his total permanent defeat. He looked at me with hollow, empty eyes, finally understanding that he was nothing. I turned back to the judge to deliver my final concluding statement. I revealed exactly what I did with the tens of millions of dollars generated from their utter downfall and the complete liquidation of their seized assets. I explained that I used every single penny of that wealth to fully fund a permanent philanthropic foundation right here in the heart of Atlanta. The foundation provides full-ride academic scholarships and venture capital business grants for young, underprivileged Black women pursuing degrees in science, technology, engineering, and finance. The very money they stole to oppress people and maintain their arrogant facade was now being used to empower the exact type of women they always looked down upon and constantly underestimated. I thanked the court for its time and walked back to my seat in absolute silence, leaving the defense table suffocating in their own ruin. The judge did not show a single ounce of leniency or pity. He handed down the maximum consecutive sentences for all four of them. There would be no early parole and no minimum security resort prisons for the Vanguard family. The bailiff stepped forward and grabbed their arms forcefully, pulling them up from their chairs. The heavy chains rattled loudly as Desmond, Yolanda, Andre, and Brittany were led away in shackles, completely stripped of their wealth, their freedom, and their stolen name. I turned and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, pushing open the heavy wooden doors. I stepped out of the courthouse, and the bright, warm Atlanta sun washed over my face, feeling like an absolute blessing after a long, dark storm. I pulled my dark designer sunglasses out of my purse and slid them on, hiding my eyes from the flashing cameras of the local press gathered on the steps. My head of security, Marcus, was waiting by the curb, holding the door of my sleek black car open. I slid into the luxurious quiet of the leather back seat, taking a deep, refreshing breath. Head to the office, I told my driver, my voice perfectly steady and calm. I have an empire to run. The ultimate lesson from Lydia's journey is that true power is never born from entitlement, deceit, or tearing others down. The Vanguard family built their fragile empire on a foundation of toxic manipulation and greed, only to watch it inevitably collapse under the weight of the truth. Lydia proved that genuine strength comes from unwavering resilience and the courage to forge your own path. Instead of letting betrayal destroy her, she transformed her deepest trauma into a formidable force for good, using her success to uplift others and rewrite her destiny. Share your experiences in the comments below if you have ever had to walk away from toxic expectations to build your own success story, and subscribe for more empowering stories of resilience.